I wonder what I was listening to a thing from Alan Watts this morning, and one of the things he mentioned in his little talk was that in at the time that he was doing the talk, which was probably like the 80s or whatever, he said what we know about the mind and neuroscience and what's happening in between our ears is similar to what they knew about the galaxies in the 1300s.
Hmm.
So I think that we like to have the belief that we have this all sorted out and everything's all deduced and we understand really what's
Yeah.
going on here. And then the reality, if you really start to unpack the layers, is like most everything still is a mystery, and the mind is one of the maybe the greatest mysteries. Maybe it's the mystery ultimately because everything's being projected from there.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting your lens and perspective of how you've dug into cognitive decline and dementia and issues of the mind. I wonder how your perspective has evolved
Oh, yeah. I
on that.
mean, there are so many unanswered questions, and the brain is such a mysterious organ. I mean, my focus has been dementia over the past decade because that's what my mother had. And I'll tell you that 90% of what we know about dementia has been discovered only in the past 15 years. As I was bringing my mother from doctor's office to doctor's office, experiencing what I've come to call diagnose and adios, I learned very early on about this cold joke that's actually circulated amongst neurology residents in medical school, and it's that neurologists don't treat disease; they admire it,
Mm,
and that's because the tools that we have at our disposal are so rudimentary
mm,
when it comes to treating these kinds of conditions. We barely understand them. I mean, we don't fully understand what causes heart disease. I mean, we have a good idea, but we don't know. There are multiple theories as to why for example, atherosclerosis develops. We don't know why we age. There are so many unanswered questions. Um, so that's why I approach these topics with an open mind and a fiercely skeptical mind, especially when people make claims that fall outside of uh, the lens of evolution and what would pass the test of logic. For example, when people say that all animal products are bad for you, I'm like, how could you be so arrogant to say that? I mean, there's no vegan hunter gatherer tribe. We certainly co-evolved with our food, and that was inclusive of animal products. Uh, and so, yeah, that's sort of my approach on these topics. All that is to say that there are so many more unanswered questions than there are answered questions. But that said, we are at a place now where we do have enough answers to warrant action. We don't have to sit idly on our hands as we await further answers. I mean, we do sort of have um, at least a semblance of a roadmap, and that's sort of what I write about. I write about the knowns, the unknowns, and I think that's important to like leave enough room for the gray so that answers can come out, and there's room for science to continue to evolve.
I think it's interesting when we say things like we have a disease.
Yeah,
Like language is meaningful and it informs kind of our perception of a thing, and it also informs the way that we're able to perceive a thing based off of the words that we're using. It's like a container for an idea. And so when you say your mom had Alzheimer's, in my mind I wonder what that means to have Alzheimer's. To me, that feels like, okay, here's the Alzheimer's, there's your mom, she's holding the Alzheimer's. Does one express Alzheimer's? Does one exhibit Alzheimer's? Does one have Alzheimer's?
yeah, it's such a good point. Because once you've seen one case of Alzheimer's, you've seen one case of Alzheimer's. Every presentation is different, and if you consider Alzheimer's disease to be the top of the mountain, there are innumerable roads up to the top. I mean, for some person, it could be metabolic in origin. For some person, it could be due to exposure to environmental toxicants that pulled the trigger. Ultimately, it comes back to epigenetics, which is the idea that we don't necessarily have a genetic destiny when it comes to these kinds of chronic non-communicable conditions. The manifestation of these disease states is the result of a dance that the environment plays with our genome. And everybody's environment is different and everybody's genome is different. we're now starting to understand that Alzheimer's disease is the result of polygenic risk factors commingled with uh, an environment that pulls the triggers on that polygenic risk. So polygenic risk means there are multiple genes at play when it comes to determining whether or not somebody is going to develop a condition like Alzheimer's disease. And that's true for other conditions as well. But for example, you might have the ApoE4 allele, which 1 in 4 people carry, which increases your risk anywhere between 2 and 14 fold, depending on how many copies of that gene you carry. But you might have genes that are protective to some degree that are working to cancel out that risk factor. And we're just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding. I mean, all the roles that our various gene polymorphisms and mutations play. So, yeah, that's why you're right. I mean, achieving a diagnosis, obviously, it's something that we direly want when we are struck by one of these conditions and we're in the fog of war that chronic disease typically presents with. But a diagnosis says nothing about the root cause of a condition. It says, what medications we might choose to throw at it, but it doesn't say anything about the etiology of said condition.
Yeah. Have you heard the Flynn effect before?
No.
Essentially it's just the from my understanding, I was like looking it up this morning as I was like going through what's happening, particularly to culture. I think in the last couple of years, especially, but in the last decade, since kind of like the technological era, and how that's affected our IQ, intelligence. You'd think that it would just make us super smart, but then paradoxically, the Flynn effect has been this effect that's been measured of humans' IQs have just been going up gradually every year for years and years. And part of that could be teaching to the tests and kind of just changing the way that just because we're better at taking tests doesn't mean that we're more intelligent, but IQs have been gradually raising. And then in the last couple decades, IQs have actually been starting to fall.
Mm,
So it's like this reverse Flynn effect is happening.
interesting.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it hasn't been measured in like every country, but the particularly these ones were in like Finland, various different countries in Europe. I would imagine similar things happening in the United States. But I wonder the impact that technology is having on cognitive function.
Yeah.
And I wonder how, distraction is, it's pretty much like that's everywhere. So I
Yeah.
wonder how that organizes the mind.
Yeah. I mean, when your devices are around, a smartphone, I mean, this is something that we've all experienced, right? When the smartphone is around, it exerts almost a gravitational pull on the orientation of attention. Like you're trying to focus on the task at hand, but there's like this pull towards your smartphone, right? It's like the pull to check your text messages, to check your emails, to look at your notifications, etc. So I think that that's definitely doing something to our brains. I mean, this notion that humans are effective multitaskers is kind of a myth. Like we're not actually great at multitasking.
Yeah.
Um, and I think smartphones only make it more difficult to do so. I think like there is this idea of collective consciousness, and I think that as a species we are becoming more aware. We are trending towards a greater collective awareness, but
Awareness towards what?
towards I don't know, like our brains evolved in a time when we and I mean our ancestors had to think linearly and locally, right? Where 30 steps equaled 30. Like you'd be 30 steps away by taking 30 steps. But today we live in a world where technology advances exponentially. 30 steps equals a billion.
Right.
And our world is no longer local, it's global. And so I think that there's a cognitive cost that comes with that, but there's also a benefit. I think it's a double edged sword. I mean, we're now more aware. There's just a lot more. It's just like I think thanks to technology, the doors of perception have in a way been opened, been forced open, and we're now aware of so much more than our ancestors have been tasked with having to be aware of. But it's like, how do we make sense of all that information, that incoming information, um, in data? So I think that there's a cost, but there's a benefit. I credit technology with being able to learn everything that I've learned about nutrition, right? Like, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in without the internet. I think that our health has improved due to technology, the fact that information has been democratized now, right? Like, we live in a world where somebody like you has a megaphone, reaches millions of people potentially, and can improve health for the better. Leverage the power of technology for human benefit. That's what I attempt to do, right? So I think there are definite benefits to technology, but there's also negatives in what it's done to our focus, to our attention. I think we all need to develop more uh, emotional grit these days, because we're confronted with viewpoints that we might not necessarily agree with, people that might, you know, it makes it easy a lot. It's a lot easier now to leave, for example, a hateful message, and to pick a fight essentially with somebody who you'd never, something that you would never do in person. But thanks to the internet, it's a lot more possible to leave negative comments on posts that you don't necessarily see eye to eye with, and I think that that takes an emotional toll. I mean, I'm guilty of reading my comments, and I'm pretty active on YouTube these days, and I love to like look through the YouTube comments, which I shouldn't. And oftentimes, I'll see a lot of positive comments, but then I'll see one that just like ruins my day.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I guess you got to take the good with the bad. I think that that technology is ultimately has been a net positive. Um,
What do you think the strongest levers in optimizing cognitive function and preventing its decline are? So the buckets might be exercise, movement, um, nutrition, um, placement of attention,
yeah.
environmental conditions. Being like if we're bathing in some type of chemicals or using deodorizers that are endocrine disruptors, or
Oh
there's
yeah.
a whole plethora of different potential assailants that could be kind of like taking us out. And there's also a lot of good stuff happening as well.
Yeah.
Even the idea that the world's taking you out is also a story and a narrative
Yeah.
that has an impact on your cognitive function,
100%.
which is very interesting. That gets into the conversation around like stress, fear.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Stress is an indiscriminate killer. Stress is a big problem, but I would say the biggest leverage points. I mean, I think first off, if you had to, if there was, if you were only to make one lifestyle modification, it would be, I would say, move more and get more exercise in, because from an a weight of the evidence standpoint, I mean, exercise really is medicine for the brain.
probably outside too would be good if you could do it.
If you could do it outside, yeah, and there are a number of reasons for that, which I could talk about, but. Uh, just off the top of my head, when you're sedentary, blood literally drains from your brain, and just brief movement, getting up, taking a walk, a 2-minute walk for every half an hour that you're sitting down, normalizes brain perfusion, cerebral perfusion, which is blood flow to the brain. Then, taking it one step further, exercise we know helps increase the expression of a miracle grow protein in the brain called BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor, which helps promote the growth of new brain cells while also fortifying and strengthening your pre existing ones. So, really important um, growth factor in the brain that we have a ton of evidence on in terms of exercise. There was a study that found that I believe it was either 1 or 2 years of aerobic exercise led to an increase of about 1% in middle-aged patients of the hippocampus, which is the memory processing center of the brain. And that the hippocampus usually shrinks by 1 to 2%. So that's a 2% swing determined by basically your decision to be more active or not. And this isn't like back-breaking exercise. This is like mild to moderate aerobic exercise. So BDNF um, is really important. Exercise is also crucially important from the standpoint of vascular health for a number of different reasons, but the brain relies on vascular health. So, actually, one of the first systems to go awry in dementia, certainly in Alzheimer's disease, but also in vascular dementia, which is the second most common form of dementia, is vascular dysfunction of the bed of uh, vasculature that supplies blood, nutrients, oxygen, calories to the brain.
Hmm.
And so maintaining a healthy blood pressure is crucially important. There was a pivotal study, clinical trial that was published just a couple of years ago called the Sprint Mind trial that found that when patients with hypertension, so hypertension is the medical term for high blood pressure, were treated medically with medicine for their high blood pressure, there was a dramatically reduced risk of these patients for developing mild cognitive impairment, which is a common form of cognitive impairment. It's often considered pre-dementia, usually converts to more severe forms of cognitive impairment like Alzheimer's disease. And they found that normalizing blood pressure in those patients was a disease modifying intervention. It basically prevented MCI, mild cognitive impairment. There was a meta-analysis that came out in 2018 that found that exercise for patients with high blood pressure is just as effective as medication. You just have to exercise. And the guidelines are about 150 minutes a week
Mm.
of moderate intensity exercise.
Found the same, really similar. There's been various different meta-analyses on this as well in relation to depression.
Oh, yeah.
So comparing it to Zoloft and various different antidepressants. It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
it's like exercise as good, and then obviously that's not to just say that, it's to conclude that all antidepressants or anti-anxieties are just like bad, but hopefully whoever you're communicating with, whatever doctor, like they're also aware of
Yeah.
your own inherent levers that you can pull on, and not just be committed to the solution is some, a pill that you put into your face.
Yeah. The efficacy of antidepressant drugs is mediated by the severity of the depression. So the more severe the depression, the more effective the drugs tend to be.
Hmm.
Mild to moderate depression, you should absolutely try cleaning up your diet and exercising more as a primary means of treatment. And I don't like to place stigma on pharmaceuticals. I
Yeah,
think
me neither.
some people need them.
Yeah.
But that's what the data says, that for mild to moderate depression, exercise is medicine. It really is medicine. I mean, it floods your brain with uh, a cocktail of neurochemicals. BDNF is actually also depressed in depressed patients by, I believe, about 50%. So
Mm.
BDNF plays a role in essentially, I mean, you could think about it this way. It helps the brain, and I don't like to use the term rewire because it doesn't really, it's not like the brain isn't like
Electrical circuit.
an electrical circuit switchboard,
Yeah.
but it does in a sense help the brain in terms of its plasticity, which can create new pathways around, old stagnant ones. If you have trauma, for example, they're doing a lot of research now with psychedelic drugs like psilocybin, and these drugs also promote neuroplasticity. So, helping the brain helping you get around, circumvent the pathways that might be linked to trauma in your brain.
Yeah.
BDNF can help do that, can help further that goal. And that's not without mentioning even like the endorphins and the fact that exercise boosts serotonin in the brain, which is a neurotransmitter that we associate with feeling good. Dopamine, which is the reward neurotransmitter. So, yeah, from the standpoint of mental health, I mean, exercise is profound. It helps balance GABA glutamate. So GABA is like nature's Valium,
Mm.
and that system gets sort of out of whack in people prone to anxiety. So yeah, it's a really powerful modality, and blood pressure, I think, is like one of these super important modifiable risk factors. If you're prone to high blood pressure, I mean, you should absolutely be exercising.
And then,
Also, I mean, you should do this, I should say, under the supervision of a doctor, because exercise, especially resistance training, does increase your blood pressure while you're exercising, but it then will drop it below baseline, similarly to what it does to inflammation. You'll see an acute spike in inflammatory uh, markers like pro-inflammatory cytokines, IL-6, and things like that in the window immediately post-exercise. Also, you'll see that with a sauna, but then you'll see a drop, because part of the signaling that is completely physiologically normal that your body uses to adapt to exercise and heat immersion and things like that. The signaling is basically inflammatory in origin. There's like an inflammatory effect, and your body senses that, and then it goes to repair. And that's how you develop strength and vigor and resilience.
It's interesting. There's it seems pretty obvious, and there's a ton of research to suggest that movement is like a solution for a lot of things, including cognitive decline
Yeah.
and depression and all the things. And then at the same time, the complete absolute opposite side of the spectrum, from at least like a musculoskeletal mechanical lens of complete utter stillness, seems to have really similar effects. Like meditation.
Yeah.
So you're talking about moving and perforating blood and all the different tissue in the brain, and it's like, well, and it that being supportive with increasing the gray matter around the hippocampus and maybe decreasing around the amygdala and decreasing stress response, all that stuff from getting out there and moving the body and shaking and wiggling. And then also, if you do absolutely nothing, that seems to be really supportive too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the difference is absolutely nothing,
Right.
like valuing the nothing.
Yeah.
So you can do whatever you want, but it's the that liminal blurry, I'm kind of doing something, kind of not.
Mm.
That's, I think, really, that's like where um, modern culture in large part is kind of swimming in, because there's always something to kind of do. You're
Yeah.
kind of resting, you're kind of exercising, you're kind of checking your phone, you're kind of listening to a podcast, you're kind of listening to music, you're kind of thinking about your bill. You
Yeah.
can.
And you're not doing any of those things effectively. Like, are you really resting? Is your body resting when you're sitting on the couch scrolling through Instagram?
Yeah.
You know, I would argue no. You're probably stimulating to some degree a stress response in your body on Instagram, because that's how those apps keep you glued to the apps, right? Like, that's why the media abides by the "if it bleeds, it leads" mandate.
Mm.
It's like, if you are a stress response keeps you glued to the stimulus. It's a very evolutionarily purposeful response that we have to things that trigger us and to stress us. And so, and also there's a negativity bias on social media as well. So the algorithm, the posts that tend to get the most comments tend to be the most triggering, obviously.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that then will get favored in the newsfeed. Although I hear Instagram is reverting back to a chronological algorithm, which I think could be potentially helpful from the standpoint of mental health. I think that's a good
Mm.
um, that seems like progress
I always get confused
in that sense.
when people post a thing like "my cat died," and I'm like, do I give it a little heart? Like, how am I supposed to respond to this?
Yeah, do I like it?
Do I like
I don't,
this?
I don't know if I like that. Yeah.
Like,
Well,
it's perplexing.
I think it comes back to well, the yin and yang. The body engenders, this ancient Chinese concept of yin and yang in so many different ways. We have the glutamatergic and GABAergic neurotransmitter sort of balance. We have the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous response, and so that, I think, is, we need to embody rest and digest and fight or flight in our lives as well. Like, we need to go to the gym and we need to activate the sympathetic nervous system by strengthening our bodies um, and engendering that side of the coin. And then we also need to adequately engender the rest and digest state, the sitting still, meditating, calming our minds. I think that they're both crucially important, and they're important for different reasons. I mean, I'm a totally novice meditator, but I do it as often as I can will myself to, and I see benefit from it.
I think it's interesting that yeah, I think that the having yin yang in the form of like just having that allowing the pendulum to truly swing from a light perspective, I think is really interesting. Like during the day, we're kind of getting sunlight in the form of LED lights and various different blue lights inside of buildings.
Yeah.
And then at nighttime, we're kind of getting darkness, but we're still getting hit by some green lights and some blue lights and some your cell phone thing and maybe the TV and maybe the little so there's that same concept of that liminal gray. It's kind of light outside, it's kind of dark inside. Have you looked into anything in relation to the value of full spectrum light and then also darkness in relation to cognitive, neurological repair.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of great researchers that are bringing this idea into the fold. Sachin Panda is one who comes to mind at the Salk Institute. He's doing a lot of research on circadian biology, and he was part of the team that discovered, I believe, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the time setter in the brain, in the hypothalamus, that basically becomes activated when our eyes are exposed to bright light, 1,000 lux in intensity or higher. And that's sort of what sets forth the 24-hour timer that we call our circadian rhythm. And every organ system is under the influence of the circadian rhythm. That's what makes it so exciting. The brain, for example, at night is when the brain's glymphatic system is activated. And that's the system, I'm sure you've talked about it many times on the podcast. I'm sure we've even talked about it together on your podcast, but it's when the brain is cleaning itself essentially of the proteins that we all create in our brains that have the tendency to aggregate and clump and form the plaques that we associate with Alzheimer's disease. And that's something that doesn't happen during the day. It happens at night.
Yeah, I call it a neurological douche.
A neurological douche, yeah. A brain douche. Good luck searching for that in PubMed, by the way. It's
But since it will be the name of this podcast episode, we'll be able
the brain douche.
At least something will come up.
People might think that you're referring to me, which that would suck. Yeah, so I mean that obviously plays a role in brain health. We want to keep our brains as pristine as possible, and part of that has to do with keeping these proteins from aggregating and misfolding and forming these plaques and tangles. We're at our most alert during the day. That is something that light exposure in the daytime can help facilitate. It helps boost serotonin in our brains. There are many reasons why just getting outside is beneficial from a brain health standpoint. So, I mean, getting outside first thing in the morning and exposing our eyes to the ambient light of the sun sets forth the circadian clock, which dictates when our digestive system is going to be the most efficient, when our metabolisms are going to be the most efficient. We tend to be more insulin sensitive, for example, in the daytime. It's when our brains are primed to be at their most resourceful and analytical and creative, because during the day, prior to the advent of artificial light, during the day is when the business would happen, right? It's when we'd have to forage for food, hunt, find new, opportunities for domicile, for living. That would all happen during the day. It wouldn't happen at night. So our brains are primed to be at their most creative at that point in the day. And it also that influences how well we sleep later on in the night. It influences when melatonin starts to be secreted by the pineal gland, which helps us wind down. Melatonin also, by the way, is one of nature's fountains of youth. It's one of the most powerful antioxidants in the body. It's actually we've seen play a role in how people treat themselves with COVID. I actually took a melatonin supplement when I had COVID, and the thinking there is that melatonin is like this really important detoxifying compound. It's not just like a sleeping drug, and so that's all dictated by light. And one of the major ways in which light can also suppress its release later on in the day, which we talked about a little bit, but getting bright light in the morning is super important. Exposure to the sun, we know, helps our bodies create vitamin D. Vitamin D is a really important hormone which affects gene function, in many different ways. About 5% of the human genome is under the influence of vitamin D, which is a steroid hormone. Many of us don't have adequate levels of vitamin D, but it plays a role in preventing autoimmunity. It's important for healthy cognitive function, preventing dementia. Vitamin D is actually one of the top low vitamin D deficiency is one of the top environmental risk factors for the development of dementia. Exposure to the sun helps create nitric oxide in our blood vessels, which helps to support vascular health, which, as I mentioned, is so important from the standpoint of the brain. Being out in nature reduces stress, which we talked about. Stress can have a negative, chronic, protracted stress can have a negative effect on the hippocampus, which is the memory processing center of the brain. It boosts immune function. There's an increase in natural killer cells when we're exposed to nature. There have been studies that have shown that being exposed to nature when controlling for all other variables boosts metabolic health, which we know is so important. About um, 1 in 10 adults these days has good metabolic health. 9 in 10 adults have some sign of metabolic illness. So, I mean, I think that that's super important. Plays a role there.
Also reduces sensitivity to pain.
To pain, yeah,
Which is
that
interesting.
doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so many reasons to get out and spend more time in nature. And I'm not perfect. Like I think that you definitely do a great job
I
of
am perfect.
well, you practice what you preach, I think. Um in the lifestyle sense. I practice what I preach in the I'm very good at practicing what I preach in the nutrition and exercise sense of things, but I don't spend as much time in nature as I would,
I think I'm just lazy.
as I would like to.
I think I'm just distracted and lazy, and the things that make me feel good are like typically outside.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's just, I think a lot of it's just I'm just a highly distracted person.
You think so?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'm just like I was born in New York City, so I'm an urbanite. So for me, it's not as hardwired into who I am to want to like get out into nature and go for a hike. It's like there's like a mental hurdle that I feel like I have to get over.
Yeah, I have like an addiction. I have like a nature addiction where I
That's
don't feel
awesome.
well. Like
Yeah.
if you put me have you ever heard of the rat park experiments in British Columbia? They're
No.
done in relation to you've heard of like rats becoming wildly addicted to cocaine and just throwing their little
Yeah,
rat
yeah.
lives away and just
Yeah.
like
Rats love cocaine.
hitting the little fact. But actually not a fact.
Those little party animals.
Yeah, the rat park experiment was done. It was a while ago. I think it was like the 60s or 70s, but maybe the 80s. We got to look up the year that it happened. But you can look up Rat Park, British Columbia, is Vancouver particularly. And what the researchers found there was that the rats were pretty darn disinterested in cocaine if you provided them with like a meaningful lifestyle.
Wow.
So you get like a little rat girlfriend in there.
Yeah.
You get like, a little rat PlayStation, a little rat, just like a little pool, like have like set the vibe.
Yeah,
A
so the
little rat
vibe.
feng shui.
Little rat, record player,
Yeah.
lava lamp.
And suddenly there's not this interest in the drug,
Wow.
which is pretty fascinating.
That is fascinating. Yeah, I mean, we've gone on hikes, but it's not,
Evidence.
yeah, I'm certainly grateful whenever I do, but it's just like, I'd rather like, I feel very comfortable like in a gym indoors. I love like being in a gym.
Yeah, I'm the opposite.
Yeah.
The original, I think that the Greek meaning for gymnasium is exercising naked
Is it?
outside.
Wow. I don't know where I'd be able to do that in LA. I feel like you would just do that like wherever.
Have you ever worked out naked?
No, I've never worked out naked. Because how do you protect? You got to protect the family. I feel like it's a risk to the wedding tackle.
Some kettlebell swings.
I don't know. It's like it seems like a liability. No.
Oh.
I mean, yeah, I've never worked out naked. I like working out shirtless. I do like working out shirtless outside.
Oh yeah.
Well, indoors too. I like working out shirtless. I like working out shirtless. I will say that. Certainly maskless.
Oh yeah. Dude, the mask.
I know.
Come on.
Yeah.
Holy shit, LA. What are we doing?
No, it's bad. Not only that, but the CDC just conceded that cloth masks don't even work very well, right?
It's so ridiculous.
It's so ridiculous. And that's what I've been freaking suffering with over my face for the past 2 years in the gym.
I found it actually kind of fine because I almost exclusively peek my little nose out,
Of course, me too.
And
Yeah.
so then we get into like this whole other conversation of nose breathing. So I think that the optimistic side of me sees masks actually as like an educator or like a tool to
helping to facilitate
to
nose breathing.
facilitate nose
Yeah,
breathing.
which is great for you. However, when the mask is properly worn, I feel like it hinders nose breathing.
Oh yeah.
So for people that are wearing masks the way that they're supposed to be worn, really,
Yeah.
um,
I was watching a video that was like a compilation of all of the the Democratic candidates poo pooing on masks
mm,
and poo pooing on vaccines and poo pooing on like anything that Trump was potentially recommending,
yeah,
and then fast forward to the
mm,
point where suddenly they're in office. It's like, oh no, now it's not only is it, it's not only is it a good thing, but it's a mandatory thing.
oh yeah. The politicization of all this stuff is disgusting. I wish I could just opt out entirely, but
I don't know how we're able to trust anything.
yeah,
Like the only evidence that we absolutely have is the things that we are told change with quickness.
yeah,
Like what you were told in this point, at least, evidently going back to, before all of this stuff with lockdowns and everything. But I mean, it changes, it seems like almost like monthly.
oh yeah.
So how can you be so confident about what you're told now?
No, I know.
Which then gets into the conversation of like where how much investment do we have in our own intuition, and like in our own, like listening to what feels right for us as opposed to waiting to be told what to do.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dance.
Yeah. I posted way back in early April 2020 that on Instagram, I posted that the virus is here to stay, which
Mm,
back then, um, that idea was something that triggered apparently a lot of people. I got a lot of heat for that post on Instagram. I got a lot of people unfollowed me. I said the virus is here to stay. The best way, and this is pre-vaccine availability. I said the best way to stay safe and healthy is to do the things that make your body stronger. Spend more time outside, exercise more, eat healthy, sleep well, de-stress, all that stuff. But to suggest that the virus was on track to becoming endemic was something that was like, blasphemous at the time.
yeah.
Fear mongering, maybe even. But it's insane to me that people, think it's like magical thinking that somehow we're going to eradicate a respiratory virus,
Right.
that it's just going to be gone. It's
Yeah.
not going to be, it's here. It's going to be the flu. Like it's going to be like the flu.
Yeah.
And Omicron is like I don't want to just like repeat what others have said. So correct me if like this has been just like beaten to death on your podcast, but
No, it hasn't. We
the
haven't talked
the
about
fact that it's becoming more transmissible but less severe, less virulent, I think is like an amazing
It's
thing. It's a
phenomenal
blessing in
news.
disguise.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's phenomenal news.
yeah. So, so I think that's a good thing. It's going to help us potentially, knock on wood, get to a state of natural herd immunity.
I feel like the analogy is like, at what point, I'm doing this analogy for the first time, so hopefully it comes out okay. But if you're if it's raining outside and you're being nudged into a pool,
Yeah.
and it's like, at what point do you just decide to learn how to swim
Mm,
and accept that you're bathing in all of the things,
yeah.
as opposed to coming from this place of getting out the umbrellas. No, now the rain's coming in from the side. Okay, so we get some plastic bubbles on the side here, and then it's like running away from the rain. It's like, you've been bathing in this since the beginning of ever.
Yeah.
So at what point culturally do we make a shift towards educating people on how to swim as opposed to protecting them from water?
Yeah. I mean, fighting frailty, I think, is will do so much for public health. And I know that's one of the focuses of your podcast, to get us all to a state of greater resilience. But just going back to brain health, I mean, frailty is one of those things that is so important to the brain. There was a study that came out, just published, found that frailty for people who are at high genetic risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, frailty um, was sort of the linchpin. So for older adults that were more frail, they were at 3 times the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease compared to people with the same heightened genetic risk for developing Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
Um, but they had their risk slashed by 2/3. So threefold risk determined solely by how frail you are of a person.
Wow. Same
And
same with cardiovascular disease in relation to grip strength.
yeah,
There's like popular research about that. I include that in my book actually. That's a better indicator of cardiovascular disease than blood pressure. is grip strength. You got your hardy grip strength. It's like your your body probably works pretty decent,
Yeah, 100%.
and that's not an indication. So then what happens there is we may myopically focus on, okay, cool, there's something about the fingertips or the wrist. You got to get, some type of workout thing for the wrist. It's like, no, no, no. It's an indication that you use your body in such a way
Yeah.
that cultivates strength in your hands.
It's like a surrogate marker.
Correct.
Yeah, surrogate marker for vigor.
Yeah.
And the same could be said about COVID, risk for COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a time of widespread frailty, of widespread metabolic disease.
Hmm.
So, um, that's my prayer, if you will, for the people of this world, to foster greater resilience. And the way to do that is to do the uncomfortable things.
Hmm.
And whether it's exercise, cleaning up your freaking diet. I mean, 60% of the calories that we consume today come from ultra processed foods. Now, granted, some people live in food deserts, right? So for some people don't have the kinds of access that we have. You live in Austin, I live in Los Angeles. We have access to, there's like a Whole Foods every 3 miles, right? So we're very lucky. But that being said, I mean, thanks to the internet, thanks to just getting this information out there. I mean, there are simple things that anybody can do, no matter where in the world they find themselves, that can help foster the kind of resilience that we're talking about.
Yeah. So I want to get into, I so greatly appreciate you outlining all of that. I feel like that was like the perfect bundle of information that I would love to, digest even deeper myself, but also provide for the podcast. I want to go into the nutritional end, and particularly because you have a book
Mm.
that is on the way.
Yeah, Genius Kitchen.
Genius Kitchen. You're a book writing machine.
Thanks, man. Thank you for helping me spread the word to your wonderful audience.
Yeah, of course. But so within that, I want to learn about the book, but I also want to more specifically focus on nutrition is one of the invaluable levers to get the body to be in a state to be ready to move and be
Mhm.
available to move and have like the clarity and the energy and like the chutzpah, the joie de vivre to like get the hell out of bed.
Absolutely.
So if we're chronically inflamed, and I think that's an interesting question as well, is the relationship that food actually has on postural patterns and movement, because I think there's a lot of things that we can eat. Coffee might be a very obvious example. You do way too much caffeine, you might literally have an embodied sensation of anxiety. You might suddenly you like grinding your teeth, or your masseter muscles might be engaged, or your shoulders might be coming up, or you might be like gripping the table. So you put a thing in your face, and suddenly there's this musculoskeletal, kinesthetic outward expression. So that's far into the spectrum, obvious. Like, wow, I can see that person's kind of like chattering in their body. What if we draw that back? How does food tune our bodies from your perspective? And if you've never thought about this as being a thing, so it won't be like, I don't expect like, aha, I've actually written a whole
No, I mean,
thesis on this.
well, food is so important, and we could talk about nutrition from a myriad of different angles. But I mean, really, the what compelled me to want to write a cookbook is the fact that knowing how to cook and eating home right there before we even get into the basics of nutrition or any of my recipes or anything like that, is one of the major leverage points that a person has on their health.
Yep.
Studies show that people who eat home more often have healthier BMIs, so healthier body composition. Well, BMI doesn't quite measure body composition, but in general, they're at lower risk for obesity. They have better metabolic health, better cardiovascular health, better family dynamics.
Mm.
So, I mean, this is something that I wasn't even aware on the research of this before I began writing, but it's something that was very important to my mother growing up, that the family would eat together every night. I mean, there were obviously some nights where we didn't, but for the most part, I mean, every night I remember sitting around the table with my family and sharing a meal. And it's one of the reasons why we've always been so close, my family. Yeah, I come from a really small family, and eating dinner together, crucially important. But from the standpoint of health, I mean, the same meal cooked at home is going to have less calories, less sodium, less unhealthy fats, right? Because restaurants are notorious for using cheap, unhealthy oils like canola oil, vegetable oil in air quotes.
Yeah. I want to add that there's just an aside there. It's interesting because I'm like obviously biased and obsessed with this whole how stuff moves us.
Yeah.
It's interesting that's moving you towards your family and moving you towards your community. And food is kind of the anchor point to move you into that space,
Oh yeah. Cooking.
which is very cool.
I mean, how many times have we cooked a meal together? And it's
Quite a
like,
bit.
yeah, we've like, I mean, we're really close friends. And I feel like cooking a meal together, second maybe to exercising together, but I would say cooking a meal together is even more of like a bonding experience.
It's like the
And
closest thing we have to a bonfire
it is, yeah.
in modernity.
Yeah.
You know, bonfire, you sit around, you all just kind of stare into the fire,
Yeah.
and suddenly stories come out.
Yeah.
You know, maybe somebody's got a guitar, or, you know, whatever. And it's just like, what are we doing? It's just, we're just here together. You know, we're with the fire. Since we don't really have much bonfires, most of us, it's like we have, you know, a pot of stew.
Yeah. Never letting you make a salad in my house again, but I digress. The audience doesn't need to know about your salad proclivities.
Is it because I touched the salad, or is it because of the olive oil?
No,
I'm a
no,
big olive oil
it's
guy.
because we were making sausages.
Oh, I put some sausages in the salad. You didn't like that.
You like cut them up and put them in the salad. I like turned away for 3 minutes. And these amazing sausages, I forget where they're from, Bel Campo or something like at the
Good
time.
place.
Yeah.
Cheddar Farm.
Rest in peace, Bel
Rest in
Campo.
R.I.P.
They were cut up and in the salad, and it was
Yeah. If you turn away for any more than 2 minutes, sausages will be infused into most dishes.
God,
That's my
Never
rule.
again.
That's my rule.
but it was fun. We had a good laugh.
Yeah, it's good time.
We had a lot of leftover salad,
A lot less.
but it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah, we're fine.
So yeah, cooking at home is a major leverage point. Super important. Now, from the standpoint of nutrition, you know, I'm big on plants and animals. I think that from the standpoint of protein and brain health and body health, I mean, we were talking about frailty, getting good quality animal protein more than what the RDA is for protein, I think is crucially important. I'm a big fan of high quality animal proteins. And it's not just because of the protein that animal products contain, it's because of the myriad of other nutrients, many of which are actually underconsumed in the standard American diet that they come with. Nutrients like vitamin B12, low vitamin B12 levels associated with depression, with cognitive decline, great source of zinc, great source of iron. If we're talking about beef and fish, creatine, other B vitamins, there's so many benefits to eating properly raised animal proteins. And then from the standpoint of preventing muscle breakdown and promoting muscle protein synthesis, which are both crucially important to, you know, maintaining resilience as we get older, you just can't beat the concentration of essential amino acids in animal protein, the concentration of leucine, the fact that in general, protein is highly concentrated in animal products. You don't have a lot of calories from carbohydrates in animal products. I mean, you could get a lot of fat calories, but that depends on the cut of animal that you're eating. So I'm a big fan of that. When it comes to you know, the evidence on dementia prevention, there are studies that have shown us, observational studies, I'll caveat, but that choline consumption is associated with about a 30% reduced risk for developing dementia. And choline is found most abundantly in animal products, primarily eggs. Egg yolks are a great source of choline. And choline provides the backbone to the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which is important for learning and memory. And patients with Alzheimer's disease will actually take drugs to try to augment levels of acetylcholine in the brain. So big fan of choline, again, only found in animal products. And all of the other myriad nutrients that they contain. Protein, for people above 65, protein consumption is associated with greater longevity, reduced risk of cancer, reduced amyloid burden in the brain. So there are all these benefits, I think, to building a diet around that. And then from the vegetables and fruit and vegetable standpoint, and then also nuts, I guess, which are plant material as well. I'm not a carnivore either, even though I'm carnivore adjacent. I can certainly speak to the benefits of animal products. I think that plants are super important. Whether we're talking about fiber and fiber's ability to nurture gut bacteria, which is so important, or the phytochemicals in plants that help to bolster our resilience from the inside, like whether we're talking about polyphenols or um, compounds like sulforaphane, which we get when we chew cruciferous vegetables. I think these are all important chemicals to consider integrating for holistic health. I'm particularly a fan of compounds called carotenoids, which are found in colorful produce. So dark leafy greens are a great source, avocados. These compounds actually have been known for many decades at this point to fortify ocular tissue. So, like in particular, lutein and zeaxanthin, we've known can accumulate in the macula, which is a portion of the portion of the retina, which is responsible for central vision. And lutein and zeaxanthin it's been known for some time that they help prevent age-related macular degeneration.
Mm.
Well, eyes are an extension of the brain. Your eyes are actually neural tissue. And we now know that levels of these two carotenoids in the macula correlate very closely with levels in the brain. And that these same compounds can actually fortify brain tissue and prevent lipid peroxidation, which is really important for keeping the uh, neuronal membrane healthy, associate very closely with cognitive health, reduce risk for cognitive decline, and also have been shown in studies. There's one study in particular that I typically cite from University of Georgia that has found that when young healthy college students supplement with these compounds, lutein and zeaxanthin, 12 milligrams a day, that they see an improvement in their visual processing speed, which is like if you think about reaction time and things like that, it's a super important aspect of our cognitive function. And these carotenoids are found most abundantly in plant foods. Kale is actually the top source, and a lot of people don't like kale, but
Isn't that funny?
with like 1 cup of cooked kale, I believe you get about 24 milligrams of combined lutein and zeaxanthin.
So is it about the preparation of these foods? Because certain plants, their defense mechanisms to predators would be chemical defense mechanisms,
Yeah.
but you can steam or pressure cook or ferment, or would that be the case with kale, or are you not on the side of the fence
Well,
of kale having any issues?
a chemical that a plant develops to defend itself from, a fungus or a mouse is not gonna do much to you in a negative sense, right? Because the dose makes the poison when talking about these toxins.
Mm.
Um, and the idea that low doses of compounds that would be toxic in high doses can actually can play a beneficial effect to an organism, that is the central thesis underlying hormesis
Right.
and hormetic stress, right? The interesting thing is that many of these compounds aren't even that bioavailable. They work via their influence on the microbiome. And so certain compounds, certain polyphenols, for example, in pomegranate, um, are beneficial to us in an indirect way. They're beneficial to us because gut bacteria actually will ferment these compounds, these quote unquote toxic compounds, and then churn out metabolites like urolithin A, right? Which is one of them that there's been a lot of research on urolithin A, which is this neuroprotective metabolite churned out by a certain species of gut bacteria when we consume pomegranate. So they provide a fermentable substrate to gut bacteria, and they bolster our health in that way, and that sort of indirect way.
As your we got to wrap this thing up. So, one of like in summation of the Max Lugavere cookbook,
Yeah.
um, who is it for? Like, what's the who would this be most supportive for? Any human being? Like, is it
Yeah, it's for anybody who wants to boost the way that their brain works, enhance their mental health, foster body resilience. And basically, here's why I'm so proud of this book is that it's not just a cookbook. So we have over 100 recipes that are super delicious. Whatever diet plan you're on, if you're plant-based, if you're a carnivore, well, probably not so easily if you're a carnivore, but pescatarian, all of the dishes can be customized to your own preferences, but full of delicious dishes that use easy to find, low cost, highly accessible ingredients. And the each recipe places at its center a food that I call a genius food. So a food that um, is essentially a powerful brain food, whether it's because of the abundance of high quality protein or omega-3 fatty acids or these carotenoids that we're talking about, or other types of healthy fats. Each one of them, each recipe basically serves like a purpose, and I talk about that in the book. But
Cool.
it's not just a recipe book; it's a resource guide. So the first 150 pages of the book, I break down every single food component, whether we're talking about dairy or meat or fish or eggs or plants or the different kinds of salts or vinegars there are. Um, each food category is basically broken down, and I go into detail on sometimes the history or how, from a culinary standpoint, we would utilize each ingredient. There's a list of what to look for when buying certain of these products, what to steer away from, and then there's a section on how to optimize digestion. Because if you're not digesting your food properly, then it's all going in the toilet anyway, right?
Mhm.
So you really want to like optimize your ability to extract nutrition from these dishes. So it's sort of like an all-in-one book. If you've never read any of my books before, Genius Kitchen is a great place to start.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Your mind is impressive.
Thanks, man. I would say the same about yours.
You're very handsome.
Thanks, man. Likewise.
Very attracted to you.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It means a lot. I've called you an Adonis many times on my show, so people know my feelings. If only you were a chick.
Yeah, I know that would work out.
Yeah.
What's the primate that's got a very large clitoris and they actually will penetrate other primates with their clit?
Ooh, I don't know.
Oh, we got to look that
That's
up.
a thing.
Yeah,
Wow. What a way to end the podcast.
Very.
Jesus.
We need a Jamie or
Yes.
we need someone to help us out with these.
Somebody. Well, when you find out, let me know. I'll be waiting on bated breath for the primate with the large penetrative clitoris.
Yeah. If anybody knows out there, listeners, reach out to somebody.
Yeah.
Let somebody know about that.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. So Genius Kitchen.
Genius Kitchen. You can get it at geniuskitchenbook.com.
Yep.
I also have my own podcast. It's called The Genius Life, and I'm active on Instagram. Max Lugavere.
Bam, and then OnlyFans be the other.
OnlyFans, yeah.
Yikes. That's where
Yeah.
it makes his living.
I show my glutes.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all for tuning in. Go grab Genius Kitchen. I think that sounds like a really tremendous, perfect resource to understand I think it's really important to understand like the raw materials that our bodies are composed of, and having a breakdown guide of all the individual ingredients. I'm immensely excited to get into that. I haven't actually gotten to hold the copy because they're not printed yet, but it sounds like the perfect resource. So
it's like a coffee table book too. It's going to look beautiful. It's like printed on really expensive, like it's not an expensive book, but it's printed on really like high quality paper and stuff. Yeah. Beautiful photography.
Any glute shots in there?
No glute shots.
All right.
If I had your glutes,
Yeah.
Aaron.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And that's it. That's all. We're going to jump over to the Genius Life podcast.